I just want to point out, getting into a fight at a Starbucks is the strangest thing. I've
think
never
it's
seen
pathetic.
fights go down at Starbucks. It is the least conducive place for a fight. Hey, what's up, everybody? I'm Nick DiMartino. That's Ben Kruse. This is another episode of Moving the Goalposts. You can follow us across social media at MTGP-ETB. You can follow Empty the Bench Network across social media at ETB Network. You can follow me on Twitter at Nick DiMart, Ben at Ben Kruse144. You can you can watch all Empty the Bench shows on YouTube.com/ETB Network. You can listen to all Empty the Bench shows on etbpodcast.com, and you can listen to Moving the Goalposts wherever you get your podcasts, and make sure to like and subscribe. And this show is Moving the Goalposts is presented by Playback. Stay tuned for later in the show to find out more. Okay, so let's get into everything. Stafford just got a restructured deal, and now he's staying in LA. Basically, he's just getting a little less money than the Rams were initially going to give him, which is a huge deal for the Rams and for that whole division. This is something that the Rams kind of had to do. It was something that both sides kind of had to do. Like, both sides kind of had to do it. I am sure Stafford probably wanted to stay with the Rams just as much as the Rams needed to keep Stafford. So I'm not in any way surprised that this happened. I didn't really think he would go to a team like the Jets or the Giants. I don't know what your thoughts on this were.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. I think that Stafford has something really going well in that organization right now. And the two teams that were interested on him were the Giants and the Raiders. And I just thought personally that he's getting up there in age. I think Stafford at this point in time in his career wants to potentially maybe get one more Super Bowl reign. I think personally, to me, he's one of the most underrated quarterbacks out there in the league. He's just a battler. He obviously was really well known for his time as a franchise with the Detroit Lions and kind of helping them going through all the struggling times. And, of course, bringing that first title in a while to LA. So I think specifically it's just the right match. Him and Sean McVay are also a very good relationship together. And just think about it, Nick. They were within a minute left to go to the NFC Championship game this past season. With the overall season that I feel like for people outside of the Rams, potentially organization, didn't think was an overall great team. I mean, I think that a lot of people thought they were a solid team, but the fact that they almost made it to the championship game over the team that are obviously won the Super Bowl, the Philadelphia Eagles, I think says a lot specifically for Matt Stafford and that Rams team. I just think that's it's a great move. They're obviously going to restructure his contract. It makes all sense in the world too as well. And also would not be shocked too if a guy like Cooper Kupp decides to potentially maybe stick around after getting news like this.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think it's true for both sides that they both kind of needed each other. With the Rams, it's like on the Rams side, it's not like Stafford. I mean, Stafford is not as good as he once was, but like, it's not like they're not a good team. I mean, if they can't, and I understand the Eagles won by a pretty big margin, but a lot of that was just sort of garbage time scoring.
Yeah.
But they were very competitive with the Eagles, who ended up winning the Super Bowl, and they were playing in Philadelphia in like 10 feet of snow.
Yeah.
I mean, Stafford used to play in a northern division, so he's kind of a little used to it a little bit. But the Rams team is not. They play in LA, so they're really, really not used to that. And the Rams looked really good, and I think that. I'm not saying the entire Stafford, the Rams have been great for all of Stafford's tenure, but they've all at least been competitive in that division, in what was a fairly tough division. And they were without question. I mean, they won the division last year, and they could have beaten a lot of teams.
Yep.
They may not have they kind of got off to a slow start, but the reason was because of injuries. I mean, if you think about it, the Rams the reason that they've been bad, like ever since, first of all, in the past 5 years, they won the Super Bowl. 3 years ago, they won the Super Bowl. And since then, whenever they weren't that good, it was really just because of injuries. And that's all it was. So with Stafford, it's clearly working. It's clearly working. And without Stafford, well, what are you left with? You're left with nothing like, without him. And you also have to remember that division is fairly good. I mean, you have to look at a team like the Niners. The reason the Niners weren't good is because of injuries. In other words, on paper, that division is very good. As long as everybody stays healthy.
Right.
And not to mention you have the Seahawks and the Cardinals in that division. And I get the Cardinals haven't always been that good, and the Seahawks have been okay. But all of those teams, I mean, all of those teams are at least a little bit of a threat. Like if everything goes right.
Well, yeah, and now you're obviously seeing some teams like the Cardinals that are starting to become in the come up now. So, like you mentioned, this division is really good, really competitive. But I think, I mean, the Stafford with the Giants and the Stafford with the Raiders, I could definitely think that there was a little bit more of anything if he left the Rams. The Raiders potentially could be a more of a logical fit because I just don't see him going to a team like the Giants, in which is a very depleted offensive line. You don't really know the overall. I mean, of course, the coaching out with Deebo is still kind of around, but like, there's just so much more unknowns. With the Rams, it's like familiarity obviously is key. I think that the families, really just they love it there. So it just makes all the sense in the world. And this, of course, the Rams. Another thing too is they got to the NFC title game after the year Aaron Donald retired. That was another big thing. Is a lot of people thought that when Aaron Donald retired, that the Rams are going to maybe have a little bit of a regression, but instead they were still fairly, like you mentioned, the Rams with Stafford have always been fairly competitive. And a lot of the time specifically that they don't, go obviously all the way or come up short is not because the Rams aren't on a bad team. It's because the injuries or just something where they just catch into a better team like the Eagles, in which they almost pulled off a really good win at a very tough place in a hostile environment and really bad conditions.
Yeah, but like we're all like we just talked about it just from the Rams' point of view, which I think is fairly obvious enough. You also have to look at it from Stafford's point of view, which is he doesn't want to end up like, and he doesn't want the end of his career to be like Aaron Rodgers or Brett Favre, where he's just bouncing around different teams and usually not in good situations. I mean, for Brett Favre, it worked a little bit with the Vikings, but for the most part, that doesn't really work very well. So there are a lot of talks about him going to like the Jets or the Giants, especially the Giants. And it would make a lot of sense look, in some ways it would make a lot of sense for the Giants. But for Stafford, that would just be a disaster. Imagine if Stafford went to the Giants. I mean, there's no way that would ever have worked out well. I mean, maybe it would have worked out okay for the Giants, but for Stafford, it's just putting him in a terrible situation in what might end up being the toughest division in football.
Yeah. And another thing too is it's one thing if he was leaving for a better team. These two teams that essentially were looking at Stafford, yes, they were quarterback needed type of teams, but there are two teams specifically that just aren't in a position to win. Stafford obviously is a lot older. He has familiarity. He's already won a reign at this overall type of place. It makes all the sense in the world for them to maybe come with a restructuring contract and then hopefully start to work some pieces around so they can still stay competitive.
Yeah, and I mean, like if he had gone to a team like the Jets, like I said, if he had gone to a team like the Jets or the Giants, I mean, the Giants, there were a lot of talks about
Rodgers,
him going there and the Giants wanting it. I mean, like I guarantee you he'd much rather work out a deal with LA and just take less money than to go because obviously he wants to. I think all quarterbacks kind of want to be in good situations.
Right.
And the Giants are probably the worst situation in the NFL. Like I can't think of any other team right now in the NFL that is a bigger laughing stock than the Giants. I mean, they might be a bigger laughing stock than the Jets and the Raiders. Like that's how bad of a situation they're in. Not to mention the fact that they're in the toughest division of all of those laughing stocks.
Yeah.
And it just got worse with Deebo Samuel, which we'll get to in a minute. And like I get the Cowboys were bad last year, but that's because of injuries. I mean, if you have a team, I mean, there's a good chance that 2 of the 3 wild card teams in the NFC, I'm not saying it's definitely going to happen, but there's a good chance that 2 of those 3 are in the NFC East. And the Giants have to play 6 games against have to play 6 games in that division against the Eagles, the defending Super Bowl champions, and the Commanders and Cowboys, who are likely, assuming they stay healthy, likely at least wild card teams. How many other teams? And they're also one of the worst in the league. I'm not saying they're the absolute worst if they're fully healthy, but they are one of the worst. And I think the Giants, from my understanding, were not willing to give up, were not willing to trade their draft pick for Stafford, which
it makes yes, it doesn't make sense specifically to get a quarterback specifically that's been you can say Stafford's been a proven winner. I mean, obviously he's won a ring and he's been consistent at least in terms of every single year, even though he hasn't won, rings every single year. He's been a consistent winner in terms of the overall organization in LA that he's been at. But if you went to a team like the Giants, I think personally as of right now, and this is obviously not a knock on Giants fans, but the Giants right now, I think are better off to draft a quarterback and kind of start from the ground up because, like you mentioned, there's just the teams that are around them overall in the division are just much better. Philly, reigning champs. Washington on the come up have their proven quarterback in Jaden Daniels. And Dallas, Dallas is Dallas. For a fact they'll choke every single year, but they're always competitive and they obviously have one of the highest revenues in the league. So you look at just the Giants, and would Stafford want to go to a place in which, he could just stay specifically in one spot where he's obviously essentially kind of what they already have. And of course, a coach that is familiar with as well, too, at an age that he's at,
Yeah. Of course, the familiarity and everything also is a big part of it. I mean, like, but the thing with the Giants though is that they didn't want to trade their draft pick, which from the GM's point of view, I think makes a lot of sense because, if the draft this year isn't necessarily amazing, at least the quarterback draft. I mean, the quarterback draft is not very good there's Shador Sanders and Cam Ward. And unless the Giants really, really love those guys, maybe, which from my understanding is they don't, although I don't really know. But it doesn't seem like
the Jets, if any team in New York has a better chance to get one of the quarterbacks, I could theoretically see the Jets potentially trading up for a guy like Cam Ward, much more than the Giants, personally.
Well, but the Giants might not even. Well, the Giants wouldn't trade up because they don't need to trade up their pick for. I was talking about trading back for Matt Stafford, which they were not willing to do. The Giants had the 3rd pick in the draft, and they could one of those guys could end up. Cam Ward or Shador Sanders could be available. The other player that you have to look at is Travis Hunter. Even if you don't like either of the quarterbacks. So the GM was not willing to make Joe Shane was not willing to make that move. And I guess it makes sense. It's one of those things where it would make sense from the GM's perspective to not want to make that move, although the head coach would likely want it because because the head coach is going to prefer whatever benefits the team short term is good for the head coach, and whatever benefits the team long term is better for the GM in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
If the Giants are fairly serviceable for a couple of years, that's really good for the head coach. But if they're serviceable for the next, but if it turns out that Stafford ends up like Aaron Rodgers, Stafford on the Giants is going to end up like Aaron Rodgers was on the Jets. If that happens, that is like horrible. That is like career suicide for the GM. But it's really not all that bad for the head coach because there's a lot of blame going to the GM.
Yeah,
and
if anything,
there's a lot of blame going to the GM, and the head coach is in the same position he was last year. The Giants stink. Like that's really all it is. So it's not quite the same for both sides. So I understand why. The other reason is even if they did get Stafford and they were fair and they were like even if you took the Rams with Stafford now and put them in the NFC East, they're probably not even winning the division.
No.
Maybe this year they would have been like second in the division, maybe.
I mean, now though,
depending on the stretch in the season and when they play the Commanders and all that, because at different stretches the Commanders were better, at different stretches the Rams were better, or whatever. And then you put in a healthy Cowboys team, assuming they're healthy next year. Even with that team's going to struggle to make the playoffs, let alone you put them on the Giants.
Yeah.
I mean, what are you going to do? Go 8-9 and miss the playoffs? Like that's more, and that wouldn't be bad for the head coach, but it wouldn't be great for the GM, especially if they end up giving up on Travis Hunter, Shedeur Sanders, Cam Ward, and at least one of those guys is going to become a star. I'm not saying all of them, but I think that would just be that could be a disaster. That could have been a disaster for the Giants. And the Jets, there were rumblings of it.
Yeah, there were rumblings. I mean, I think that, right now, from what it sounds like, I mean, Connor Hughes, I mean, you probably know, obviously, Connor Hughes, probably a lot more than I do, obviously, with him covering the Jets, but he's been saying a lot of stuff the last couple of days with the Jets quarterback situation. And potentially, from what it sounds like, is the Jets, are going to probably have Tyrod Taylor and then potentially go for another potential bridge guy, whether it's a guy like Marcus Mariota. Apparently, that's been a name that's been floated around, which I don't even think he'd be a bad fit. Mariota always feels like he kind of gets praised wherever he is, but he obviously, the quarterbacks that are kind of around him are just a lot better, and that's obviously not a knock on him. And then you have Carson Wentz, and there was one other one that I was thinking about as well too. Fields. That was another one as well too. And I think Fields, I don't know how I would feel about that with him in New York. I mean, I think from what it kind of feels like though, is the Jets, I think, are trying to go for more of a mobile quarterback. Because that's kind of how the league is right now at this point in time. And it's more successful when you kind of have a guy like that. So Stafford, I just think that he just fits the overall scheme too of what the Rams, of course, are running. If he went to a team like the Jets, Nick, yes, I think that the Jets would be pretty solid, right? Because I think the Jets obviously still have a pretty good defense, and I think that the coach that's coming in Aaron Glenn, I know he obviously is more fit as a defensive-minded type of coach, but you would have to think after the disaster of coaching that you have from last year that it couldn't be any more worse if you brought a guy like Stafford, who would probably give you, for sure, I would probably say between 8 and 10 wins.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that I guess that might be true, but you also have to consider the young quarter. You also have to consider Jordan Travis.
Yeah, him too. Well, there's a report I also said too that the progression is making in terms of recovery. There potentially could have been a setback. So maybe that's another reason why Connor Hughes floated those names potentially out there, is because maybe they need just kind of backup insurance just in case if a guy like Tyrod's going to start or somebody else. I mean, I still wouldn't rule, of course, the Jets drafting like a third, day type of quarterback. And, it could be a competition. Who knows about how you guys are going to be doing, but we'll see.
Yeah. And you also have to remember, Stafford is 37 years old now.
Yeah.
So so even if you were to even if the Jets were to sign him or the Giants or whoever were to sign him for maybe a 4-year deal or something like that. Well, at the end of that deal, he's like the same age as Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah.
And Aaron Rodgers has actually aged fairly well, fairly above average for a quarterback. So let's not pretend that it's the same thing might not likely happen there.
Yeah.
With Stafford. I do also want to talk a little bit about Deebo Samuel traded to the Commanders, and really almost feels like the Luka Doncic trade of the NFL. This trade was so lopsided. It's not that far. I don't think any trade in the NFL could be as much of an earthquake as an NBA trade.
But yeah.
Or free agency, off season. I mean, I know it's not the off season, but sort of off season, hot stove stuff. Football is the least significant by far.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, just overall. And And Deebo Samuel getting traded to the Commanders for a 5th-round pick was really, I don't even know. I mean, the Commanders, they got him for like nothing. That's like nothing. I mean, and not only that, why do the Niners even care that much about a 5th-round pick? They're not even like, that is something that a team does. Like, that's something that a team does that is in like desperation mode. It's almost like a baseball team that trades a star pitcher for like prospects because they know they're not going anywhere. Like, that's what this move looked like to me. But the Niners are not a bad team. They were just in the Super Bowl 2 years ago. I mean, they were, 1 year ago, they were in the Super Bowl. And it was just a weird move to me because the reason that the Niners were bad this year is because of injuries. But, I saw them play against the Jets week 1, and they didn't even have McCaffrey, and they looked pretty good. So I was just struggling to understand their thought process with trading Deebo Samuel, especially when, like, he's so impactful to that team. I mean, like, he might not be the best wide receiver in the NFL or anything, but he's so versatile and can do so much and is just so impactful. I mean, like, and to the Niners, at least specifically, very impactful. So I'm struggling to understand what their thought process was.
So this is how I feel about it. And in terms of the Luka comparison trade kind of similarity, I agree to disagree. I agree specifically that it kind of came out of nowhere in terms of the timing of it, because I think if anything, I felt that Deebo was probably going to get moved next week in terms of when kind of all that stuff is going to be happening. But theoretically, right now, you can make trades. It just, they won't be official until the new league year, which comes next week. And apparently, according to Rap Sheet, in terms of he was the one that broke the trade, the Commanders really were the main team that were pretty much on Deebo's services for pretty much so far all offseason besides Houston. And yeah, I mean, Adam Peters, man, what a fleece job. I mean, to get a guy like Deebo Samuel, who, by the way, people are making it seem like he's washed. I mean, yeah, he might not be the same guy he was a couple years ago, but I feel like he's been injured at times the last couple years, and maybe his explosiveness isn't the same, but he could still flat out play. I mean, it wasn't like the guy just fell out completely on the face of the earth, and he's a perfect fit too, Nick, with Jaden Daniels. The Commanders really were trying to get a guy alongside Terry McLaurin for a long period of time. And now specifically, you have your quarterback, which you just got last year. And now specifically, this upcoming year, you've got a player who's very versatile, like you mentioned, and Deebo Samuel. I think that the Commanders are going to use a ton of motion, which they did last year. But the guy like Deebo Samuel, that's a perfect overall player you can use it for. And I think for a 5th-round pick, this basically tells me, Nick, that the Niners didn't want to, they want to move him. Simple as that. I mean, they have guys like Ricky Pearsall that's basically on the come up. They have Juwan Jennings, and they might draft a receiver. Because as much as Deebo is an great overall receiver for them, they must have just felt that kind of his time is done there. And there was kind of floaters about him being moved last offseason. So it was almost kind of inevitable it was going to happen. It was just in terms of when it was going to be. And so, yeah, I think that this is a win-win for both sides personally. I think that it's really a big-time win for the Commanders. I think that they won this overall deal. To get a 5th-round pick for a receiver of a caliber like Deebo Samuel, who was looked at as one of the best receivers a couple of years ago, right? He's still a very explosive receiver, and he's still like a number 2 at best. I mean, he's still a very solid receiver. So I think this is a great fit for the Commanders, and I think it's also a win too in terms of the Niners, because I think that for a long period of time they were trying to get rid of Deebo Samuel, and in terms of which they did, I don't think they had no hard feelings against him, but I think in terms of the direction that they have right now, I think that they kind of see some guys kind of on the come up, like a guy like Jennings and Pearsall, and then maybe you have to pay Brock Purdy and a couple other guys too. So I could definitely see why they traded him. I'm obviously not in favor of it, but I think for a team like the Commanders, who in terms of are a young type of team, this is a perfect fit for them.
Well, do you think it has to do with the amount of money they're paying him? Because I'm looking at his contract right now. And by the way, NFL contracts are like hieroglyphics. It's like the most confused. Like it is like writings in like a foreign language where the letters are different, like it is the most confusing thing in the world.
I don't think that the money really was a massive factor. I mean,
Well, it's got to be because they have a whole bunch of well, he's a free agent in 2026.
yeah,
So he has one more year left on his contract
right.
until he's a free agent.
Mhm.
Although it looks like he's an unrestricted free agent if they void it. If his contract, I'm not. Oh, so he's a free agent in 2026. So he
Yeah,
has one more year on his contract. Look, I don't know what their motivation is, but money's got to have a lot to do with it because the Niners have a whole lot of players that they have to pay, and they can't pay
right.
everybody. That's the only thing I could think of.
Yeah,
But he is like, but he was so impactful. I mean, look, you never know. I mean, when the Chiefs moved on from Tyreek Hill, they
right.
won the Super Bowl 2 years in a. They ended up winning the Super Bowl 2 years in a row. So
Yeah.
you never know, and that tends to be the case with wide receivers.
Yeah, I mean, listen, you mentioned in terms of the money being a factor. I agree completely, but I don't think specifically it was the reason in terms of why they moved him specifically. I think more of the reason, if anything, yes, obviously money was massively involved, but I think that John Lynch saw the direction of this team in terms of what they have kind of coming up in terms of some of their young receivers kind of blossoming with Brock Purdy already. And who knows in terms of Brandon Ayuk as well. I mean, maybe they keep kind of making Brandon Ayuk kind of the main receiver, or maybe they deal him too. There's a lot of rumors in terms of right now that a team like Brandon Ayuk, maybe they obviously move him too after they kind of see something like this too. So I definitely am not surprised really that this obviously happened. But yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with you in terms of the money not being a factor. I just think that there are so many other more things that I think that they were kind of prioritizing more, and they just kind of saw the overall long term vision kind of being a massive thing to it.
Yeah, but like, what is? I mean, it's also got to be good for the Rams, I think, in terms
Yeah,
of at least in the short term.
right. No,
Uh,
I'm looking at Samuel. Like I said earlier, people thought they're calling him washed. Nick, he averaged. I'm just looking at his stats right now. Last year, 13.1 average yards per catch. That specifically, in the last, I don't know. I mean, from 2019 till this past year, he's averaged in terms of after catches 10 yards a catch. I mean, so
Not only
it's not.
that, he can also do a lot of the things running backs do.
Yeah,
He can take a lot of snaps from out of the backfield.
yeah, I just think that with a guy, I know that the Commanders last year, I think I don't know if you remember the tweet from Schefter, but Schefter basically had a tweet about the Commanders potentially being a team to watch out for that players going to start to potentially be more attracted to, and I just kind of looked back in terms of that tweet after Samuel went there. I'm just like, it made sense because they found Jaden Daniels, and Jaden Daniels, they definitely know for a fact that they hit on him because he got them to the NFC title game
Yeah.
against the defending champs, which is absolutely something that I don't think anybody expected. And essentially, once you get the quarterback, everything else basically evens itself out in terms of when it comes to players being attracted to. So, yeah, that's basically all I got to say about it.
And I think and by the way, we talked about it. We talked about it with the 49ers, but we didn't talk about it with the Commanders in the NFC East and how impactful that might be. I mean, just with a young quarterback like Jaden Daniels, giving him another star wide receiver is going to be a pretty big deal, I think, especially in, like I said, a very tough division. That could really make or break things for the Commanders next year because you know what? It's not, even though they were great, they were a great story this year. There's no guarantee they're a playoff team next year. And that often does, you never know with sophomore slumps and things like that. So I think it's like I said before, it really just puts the Giants behind the eight ball in their own division even more than they already were.
Yeah. And another thing, really quick, too, before we go into the next thing, is the Commanders, their cap space. I mean, they have a ton of cap space, and Adam Peters, I think this is just kind of the one thing that the Commanders wanted. Is they wanted to get a number 2 receiver to help with, Terry McLaurin, and they got that. So now specifically their next thing is to just add in terms of more kind of around the team. So Commander fans out there, I'm really happy for you all, and you definitely have something great building for years to come.
Yeah. And then I do want to talk about what to expect in NFL free agency. And one of the questions is, will the Vikings franchise tag Sam Darnold? Which is, the big talk of the town. And I would say, and I think that they would be, and I've also seen stories that the Raiders, I saw this one story that the Raiders are working or trying to trade for him. And there's all sorts of talk with Sam Darnold and where he might go. Although I think the most likely thing is that he'll be franchise tagged by the Vikings. If the Vikings don't franchise tag him, frankly, they're drunk. They're crazy if they don't franchise tag Sam Darnold. I mean, like, I understand people are going to only remember how the season ended. But I think he was almost like, from my estimation, he was comeback player of the year this year. I mean, did anybody ever expect Sam Darnold to be as good as he was?
No.
I mean, like, Sam Darnold, I've never seen anybody like it's sort of like wrestlers going from a heel, like professional wrestlers going from a heel to a face.
Yeah.
Like, that almost never happens. That it's the same thing with Sam Darnold. He went from bust to maybe not franchise quarterback, but able to get paid a lot of money. And he's like the first player that I've seen play himself out of a bust. You know what I mean? Like, he's the first, like, usually when a quarterback is a bust, that's just his reputation forever. In Sam Darnold's case, he like, and they just become a punchline forever. In Sam Darnold's case, he was a bust, and he was that punchline when he was on the Jets. He became a punchline, basically. And this year, he played himself out of that reputation. How many other quarterbacks have done that? And I never expected that to ever happen. Nobody did. And even though he was terrible the last 2 games of the year, I mean, the fact that the Vikings lost 2 games and literally lost to 2 total teams. They only lost to the Lions and the Rams.
I
mean, actually, I think they went 14-3. They won 14 games with Sam Darnold. And you know what? Even though he was bad in the playoffs, nobody can take that away from him. And I don't see how the Vikings they would be crazy to not franchise tag Darnold.
Yeah. And after this, Nick, I do have some breaking news I do want to report, because there just came some breaking news on the show. Nothing specifically. It's NFL related, so obviously I would like to break it now after the fact. But in terms
you're not breaking it. Somebody else broke it.
Well, yeah, in terms of at least somebody breaking here on the show. But no, I agree with you. Sam Darnold, to me, and listen, I'm not the biggest Sam Darnold fan. I'm gonna be the first to admit it. I think that he's a serviceable type of quarterback, though. That's the biggest thing, and I'm really happy for him. I guess that makes sense, because I think that he went to a specific place in which he got to reunite. He got to be specifically with a really good coach too, and Kevin O'Connell, who's an offensive-minded type of coach. You match him up with Justin Jefferson. I mean, you hopefully should be able to have some stats, being able to match with arguably the best receiver in the league. So I just think that they have someone really cooking for them there. I think that he should be franchise tag. I think that he does deserve it. And I know a lot of people are having this overall like thing of like, oh, Sam Darnold didn't come up big when it obviously mattered most. You got to take into account, Nick, that those 2 teams specifically, one is a team in division, so obviously have a ton of tape already on him. And then 2, the other team was the LA Rams, in which they basically had the perfect game plan defensively to go against Sam Darnold, because they basically saw the team the week before, and they basically, the defensive-minded coaches, used the exact same game plan on him. So there was obviously some tape that they saw on that end, but it doesn't seem like, to me, that Sam Darnold is a complete bum. Essentially, he's a pretty serviceable quarterback. He's going to get paid, and I think that he should just stay with Minnesota, at least for another year. I mean, I think that's just obviously the right get, and I think with the Vikings, they were a really good team this year. They were arguably probably the hottest team in terms of the NFC for most of the season. And it was because of Sam Darnold. I mean, you could obviously choose the locker room reaction, of course, have to be in the Packers. I think for the division, I think 3 weeks before the season ended, everybody loved him. And so I just, Yeah, I mean, could it happen where he goes? Sure. I mean, I think a team like the Raiders, a perfect fit, and the Giants. I think the Giants are a lot more feasible than a guy like Stafford, to be honest, because I just kind of feel like the Sam Darnold is more of a quarterback in which a team's kind of in a transition, or kind of a team that's on the come up. And I just think that he is just kind of he found his home there. So I think that he's going to stay.
Yeah. What was your breaking news?
So I
I'm
know that
sorry, like, I
Rappaport.
just have to hear the breaking news. You're like, "We have breaking news," and you didn't say what it was. You're just talking about Sam
So
Darnold.
well, yeah, I do apologize. So Devontae Adams' name has kind of been floated around in terms of the New York Jets, in terms of if they trade him or potentially release him. And the New York Jets, according to Tony Pauline, who you probably heard of,
Who?
Tony Pauline, he has been kind of a name that's been floated around. I think he's a beat writer. Let me take a look really quick right here. But maybe I mean unless it's a fake complete tweet, but I mean I got an overall breaking thing from Pauline about 4 minutes, 5 minutes ago that the New York Jets are planning to cut Devontae Adams this week.
Oh,
So
wow.
so I mean obviously I'll kind of see more about that
Oh, I see it now.
as we speak right now. But I mean, yeah, this obviously was kind of something that was going to be the inevitable in terms of if they would trade him or not. But yeah, it sounds like as of right now that the New York Jets are going to trade Devontae Adams. So I mean,
They're going to
obviously,
cut Devontae Adams,
yeah, to cut him. I'm
not
sorry, I
trade
meant
him.
to trade. Well, eventually moving on. You're going to be moving
Yeah,
on.
move on from him.
So yeah, but yeah, I mean, I guess I mean there's obviously a lot more guys that we could talk about, but just as yourselves as a Jets fan, I mean, you know, you're probably not surprised about it, obviously, because he kind of came because of Aaron Rodgers in terms of kind of reuniting with him. But
Yeah.
do you kind of see any avenue in which Devontae Adams was going to potentially stay with you guys for another potential year with another quarterback, or is it basically just because of the Aaron Rodgers factor coming into play with it?
Yeah, of course I could have seen him staying. I mean, they obviously got him because of Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah.
It wasn't a bad move, though. I know Aaron Rodgers wanted him, but it really wasn't a bad move. He still is
Yep.
he still is a very good wide receiver.
Yep.
The only issue is the Jets don't know their quarterback situation, and if
Yeah.
there's no good quarterback, well, what is a really good wide receiver going to do? Like, you kind of
Yep.
need, like, wide receivers are kind of dependent on their quarterbacks. So it's a little hard to say that it would make a lot of sense. Like, maybe it would just make more sense to just, like, if they're moving on from Rodgers, which I think might end up being a mistake,
Mm,
given
the update
and
after.
like, I think they've invested so much in Rodgers, they might as well stick with him for another year. And I'm not saying Aaron Rodgers is the player that he once was,
Mhm.
but he still is serviceable.
Definitely.
He was just coming off a really bad Achilles injury, and the first year off that injury, I mean, look, I don't know this for a fact, but there's a good chance that it takes a really long, like the year after that, it might be a lot. He might be a bit more healed from that
Mm,
injury, and he's still a serviceable player.
yep.
Um, he's still a serviceable player. Like, he went like 28 and 11. Not to
It's still
mention the
really
fact,
good for him for his age.
yeah, and not to
Mhm.
mention the fact that, like, his wide receivers were awful in a lot of ways. Like, there were a lot of really bad routes, a lot of wrong routes, a lot of drops, and
Yeah, that was a big one. Mm.
not to mention cartoonishly bad coaching. Um,
Yes.
and so coach, like, the worst coaching in the NFL last year. Like, I would give the Jets coaching last year an F minus after they fired Robert Saleh. You end up giving the job to Jeff Ulbrich, who doesn't know what he's doing.
Mm.
And you just don't. It's hard to say that, like, the Jets will be in a better situation next year. Like, I don't think they will be. Now, I'm not saying he's a long-term answer, but, like, maybe he's at least a short-term answer.
Yeah.
And yeah, the Jets are just a disaster of a franchise. I don't know what they're going to do next year in terms of quarterback play. Um, Hopefully Jordan Travis ends up being something great, but we don't
Mhm.
know.
Yeah. I
Um,
mean,
We don't know. And by the way, I do want to talk about this. Woody Johnson got an F from the NFLPA.
Speaking of the Jets.
Which I will say, in fairness, this is strictly from the NFLPA's perspective. So it's because it's strictly from the NFLPA's perspective, they kind of have their own agenda. But giving Woody Johnson an F as an owner is just sort of a popular thing to say. It's a popular opinion. Nobody thinks Woody Johnson is a good owner. And like clearly, like Woody Johnson is like the James Dolan of the NFL. Like he has, he's a New York owner with a terrible rich guy, really, really rich guy with a terrible reputation. That's really what Woody Johnson is. He's like the James Dolan of the NFL.
He's basically pretty much the owner of whatever can go wrong, just like James Dolan was, or I guess technically speaking of right now is still with the Knicks.
Yeah. So Woody Johnson, like getting an F is like, okay, that doesn't really surprise me because I think everybody would give James Dolan, talking so much about thinking about the Knicks.
They're both similar.
Yeah, similar enough, I would say. That I would give. Well, at least the Knicks are good now. The Jets, we'll get to them. The Jets are not. So that was just my thought process. Was like, yeah, he's a bad owner, but like I don't really care what the NFLPA thinks specifically because all of that is sort of special interest stuff. It's just sort of like I just care about how they are as owners overall, and not necessarily what the players union thinks.
I agree.
And yeah, I mean, the Jets are they're a disaster of the franchise. They're a disaster of a franchise because of the ownership. Just like any sort of franchise or business, like when you're perpetually bad for decades, that comes back to the ownership because that's the ultimate cause. It's run by the same people. Like that's why people say franchises are cursed, but like that's not true. Franchises are not cursed. They're just run by the same incompetent buffoons, and that's why that's why they're not successful. Like you have to get to the root of the problem, which is ownership.
Yeah, no, and there's two things that I'm kind of thinking as of right now. One, it starts at the top for pretty much any type of organization or business. So if you obviously don't have a great, obviously start to go over the top, that obviously just kind of dominoes into everything kind of behind it. So that's obviously one thing. And two is it's basically, Groundhog Day all over again. It's basically doing the same thing over and over and over again, and you're expecting the same exact type of results. And what are you supposed to expect?
Moving the goalposts is presented by Playback. Watching sports is more fun with others, but we spend too much time watching alone. Playback is a virtual space where communities can stream live sports together with everyone perfectly synced up. Creators can hop on stage, deliver their own play-by-play analysis and commentary, and invite viewers up for Q&A. Playback makes watching sports fully interactive and a social experience. From playing fantasy sports, rubbing your favorite players and teams, and watching with the commentators and communities you care about. Win or lose, sports are best enjoyed together. Join our community by going to playback.tv/ETB network to find out more, including our live stream schedule. And now back to the show. By the way, I want to talk about Jordan Schulz versus Ian Rappaport. Some more NFL stuff. So there's a weird backstory to this. It seemed like they got into a fight at a Starbucks. First of all, fighting, and it wasn't like a physical altercation exactly.
No.
But which, by the way, Jordan Schulz is Howard Schultz's son. Howard Schulz is the founder of Starbucks. He ran for president in 2020. And I didn't know that. I mean, Schultz is a very common last name, so I didn't really put two and two together.
Yeah, I didn't know it either until I saw.
By the way, it is kind of funny that like it just happened to be at a Starbucks.
Yeah.
Do you think Jordan Schultz gets free coffee?
I imagine he gets something of.
But like, I don't know if he does anymore. Anyway, I just want to point out, getting into a fight at a Starbucks is the strangest thing. I've never seen fights go down at Starbucks. It is the least conducive place for a fight.
Yeah, no, because most people are either it's an in and out type of place or people are there to study. It's a quiet type of environment. At least most of the Starbucks that I've been to it's fairly quiet. I mean, if I see people on a Friday night, a lot of people that are there are either studying or, getting food. But yeah, no, if you're going to have a fight, if any type of fighting altercation, that would be one of the last places I would see it.
Yeah.
I think
Like honestly, like fighting at church is probably more common than fighting at
yeah,
Starbucks. Because at least at church, there's like a whole bunch of people might fight in the parking lot over a parking space or something like that. Like Starbucks is the strangest place because it's the best place ever. Starbucks, like honestly, I love Starbucks. Like if heaven is real, I think it would just look like Starbucks. That's what heaven would be to me, like just Starbucks.
I mean,
Like
yeah,
it's amazing. It's an
mhm,
amazing place. I'm always in a good mood at Starbucks.
that's good.
Um, it's the most amazing coffee ever.
Mm,
You live in
not a
New
coffee
England,
guy,
which is
but
more of a Dunkin' place. Um, I don't know how. I don't know what it's like in where you are specifically, but
yeah,
I've I was in Rhode Island for a weekend one time, and there's way more Dunkins than Starbucks. I drove 25 minutes to the Starbucks just to get the Starbucks instead of the Dunkin'. Like
yeah,
that's how much I love it. Anyway,
mhm,
um, so this took place at a Starbucks. I guess they bumped into each other. I don't think
yes.
anybody ever says. I don't think anybody who challenges somebody to a fight says, "Meet me at Starbucks." It's more like
So
meet me in the parking lot. They're never like meet me at Starbucks. That never happens. But can you go through the background of this a little bit?
yeah, of course. So yeah, I was seeing an article before coming on here, and I mentioned to you off air. But basically, what happened, like you mentioned, it was last Wednesday afternoon at the Starbucks at the JW Marriott in Indy. So of course, for people that weren't aware, both of those obviously those two guys were in Indy for the NFL Combine. So that's basically kind of what happened. And like you mentioned before, Jordan Schulz is the son of former CEO of Starbucks, Howard Schultz. So, which I didn't know anything about that, but basically, Rappaport was talking to an agent, and then Schultz approached Rapsheet and said, "We need to talk." And so, obviously, that was what it is. They talked, and then Rapsheet said, "We don't need to talk." And then basically, Jordan made some accusations about Rapsheet. We're told, kind of went back and forth. Ratchet kind of was thinking it was kind of not, you know, basically they were just essentially going face to face at this point in time. And then any type of comment that Schultz is basically saying from Rapsheet's side, he said to say it to my effing face. So I mean, yeah, it just was a bunch of just back and forth. I don't really know specifically if there was any type of punches thrown per se. I don't think that there was. I think this is more of an altercation type of conversation. Um, but yeah, just a very weird place that, like we talked about, a very weird place to have it. I think maybe partly was because, of course, his son is probably trying to defend his dad of the just the plates themselves, and I guess maybe Raps maybe said something that maybe just irked them or whatever. But I don't know. I'll be very curious to see in terms of the next time they both talk to each other, because I assume it's probably something that it's probably something they're not going to be talking about for a while, or it could be potentially overblown. We don't know. But at least that's kind of the overall background story. There was kind of a altercation, conversation between each other at a Starbucks last week, and pretty much, I mean, this was really it's just an altercation match apparently at a random Starbucks, and you know, we'll have to see specifically if there's more intense detail potentially for to come, but at least for the time being, it was interesting to say the least in terms of when I got that notification.
Well, I didn't know report like it seems like the nerdiest thing in the world. Like they're getting into fights over like as like reporters getting into fights. It's so I saw according to Awful Announcing, um I, hold on a second. According to Awful Announcing, I was reading that apparently uh it, it, Jordan Schultz reportedly accused Ian Rappaport of saying that he offers Uber stock in exchange for scoops. Um, I don't know. Like, it's a weird thing. He's accusing him of accusing. He's like the accusation. It's like an accusation of an accusation, which is
Right.
a little weird. It's like I'm accusing you of saying this. I'm accusing you of accusing me, um, which I don't know if that's true or not, if he ever said that. That sounds like an odd thing to exchange something for, though. Uber stock?
Mm-hmm.
Who uses Uber that much? I thought that was kind of funny.
Right.
But yeah, this is a weird, really weird thing. Although pretty funny. I would have to say pretty funny. So anyway, I want to get into some NBA stuff. Embiid is out for the season.
Yep.
Out for the season. And this is just, I mean, the Sixers are one of the worst teams in the NBA right now. I mean, it goes without saying. And my thought process was, how does this look for the ownership and the GM? Because from my understanding, I don't know if this is true or not, but from my understanding, the ownership was not too big on signing Embiid to all of that money. And Daryl Morey is the one who wanted to do it. To me, it almost seems like this is what the Mavericks' biggest fear was with Luka. It's like Nico Harrison's worst nightmare came true for the Sixers. And people are like talking about this, but it's like, if there's going to be a year where where Embiid shuts it down for the rest of the regular season, it's this year, because they're not going anywhere anyway.
Yeah, this was coming, right? The Sixers obviously stink, right? They tried to essentially do a big three, right? That basically blew up in their face. Oh, where have I seen this before? I've seen a ton of big threes in the last couple of years that have blown up, and this is just another example. It's clear as day. And obviously, Paul George, I think that the fit was but like, I didn't think that when you looked at kind of other teams in the East that this was going to be a massive needle mover to me, saying, oh, the Sixers are just going to be a exponentially much better team, with Paul George than without. I think that Paul George is kind of on the decline, if anything, but that's just kind of over a conversation for another day. But Embiid specifically, they tried to do so many injections for him apparently the last couple months, and just the sitting now. I mean, low management, Nick, I think is fine, right, to some players in terms of like, having a day or two off. But this was a guy that was getting to Ben Simmons type of load management level, in which any type of excuse that he would take to have load management that he was going to take. Because
including saying that he wouldn't want to play, that he wouldn't play in back-to-back games.
Yeah, well, that was obviously one thing too. So yeah, he first said he didn't want to play in back-to-back games. So of course that already kind of hurt his overall value already. But then you had the injuries on top of it. And yes, like, I don't want to wish anybody injuries per se, anyone, right? But just kind of the way that he was kind of just taking it, it's just like there was like a couple of injuries, like statuses from Joel Embiid that I saw of like a pinky, or like it was kind of like his back. And I'm like, you're getting paid millions of dollars, and you're telling me specifically you have to keep sitting out because of this so-and-so type of injury. It wasn't just this one type of injury. I mean, I think that the back obviously kind of did him in, but he kind of took the load management, I think, to another level this year. And yeah, I understand that you're coming back and the team isn't very good, so maybe that's kind of why you're kind of sitting out. But he really did the franchise very dirty, at least in my mind, because he just, I think that the one really big time that he did anything potentially this year was going to let's play my Boston Celtics and won on Christmas Day. I think outside of that, there's really no other time that I heard Joel Embiid's name out there unless he was injured, and which he was basically the whole entire season. So, I feel bad. Obviously, he's going to miss the rest of the season. I mean, like I said, I don't want to wish everybody injuries, but it was inevitable that they just had to shut him down. The Sixers are awful. They have to kind of figure out their overall thing. And the people are saying to trust the process. The process, guys, has been done. It's overran its course for a long period of time. And if you think that it's still not done, then you could talk to me off the air about that. But it's done. Let's just basically, say it right here on the air overall. So that's basically everything, Nick, that I have for you about this. Is he basically took advantage of low management timing, and it's over. That clear is.
Yeah, I mean, but we also have to remember how great of a player Embiid is when he is healthy. And he has, and in his defense, I will defend him for a minute. Yep. His he has also played through injuries a lot. Unlike Ben Simmons, like last year he was injured when he played against the Knicks in the playoffs. He was clearly playing hurt. So he's done a lot. He's played hurt a lot too. I wouldn't say that that's never happened. But it does seem like the Sixers, like I get we're in a load management era of the NBA, but it seems to hit the Sixers the hardest.
Yeah. I would say between them or probably the Clippers. Obviously Kawhi has been a guy that – but I think with Kawhi, it's like Kawhi I don't think is purposely – I think with load management, I think that, it's kind of a massive common name of like people are just kind of taking time off, but people kind of take the load management at different levels. It's like sometimes people just need, a day off because of a sore ankle, right? And then you obviously have some people that, just need time off to take time out, or you just use it to your advantage because theoretically speaking, you could be getting paid millions of dollars to just sit on the bench apparently now these days. Hey, you could ask Ben Simmons that. But, I agree with you in that case in terms of Embiid is still a very good player. He's a very good player, don't get me wrong. But he's definitely been a lot more injury riddled, at least unfortunately, the last couple of years. And his just overall consistency. I'm not saying he's going to take a dip by any means, but it's just when you're hurt the last couple of years specifically, I'm not saying he's not going to be the same guy per se in terms of stat wise, but you could just never unfortunately get into a rhythm and you're just consistently just time and time again, you're hurt, but like you mentioned, he has played through injuries. And so I'm not obviously saying that he's been hurt a lot and just not, play through them.
Yeah.
But I'm just talking about this season. I mean, I just looked at it from a clear non-Sixer vantage point, and I basically was just looking at it in terms of the fact of there were some things specifically that you definitely could have played through, but I think that you want to just basically not play because, maybe the team stinks this year, or you just didn't want to play. I don't know.
Yeah, well, right now, if we want to talk about the best teams in the NBA,
the
hottest team right now is the Lakers. As of this recording, I would say they're the best team in the NBA right now. I mean, they're the hottest team right now. It doesn't mean it's going to stay that way. The Oklahoma City has a better record. Now they're second in the West. Yeah. And my pick to come out of the West right now is the Lakers.
Okay.
The Lakers is my pick to come out of the West right now. Oklahoma City is great, but they're still young and inexperienced, and there is a good chance that they're just better built for the regular season than the postseason. The Lakers have way more experience, and the reason the Lakers have been so great has not just been Luka, it's been LeBron. LeBron has been incredible in this stretch. I mean, at the age of 40, has just been unbelievable. I mean, if you look at his like last, just 5 games, and I talked about this on extras for last week's show, and LeBron has just been unbelievable as of late, and the Lakers right now are just look like the hottest team. That's what sports is, just teams getting hot at the right time.
Yeah, no, don't get me wrong, man. Heck, I'm a Celtics fan. I should hate the Lakers, but I do really – when the Lakers are good for the NBA, the league is in very good hands. And I think that after the Luka trade, a lot of people were speculating in terms of is he going to be ready to play? I know there's a lot of people that were very curious in terms of his, meshing with LeBron early on and often, but they haven't skipped a beat per se at all. They had a couple of bad losses, I think, kind of early on in Luka's tenure, but with the team, but overall, I mean, they've been playing at a very high level. And I think, like you said, LeBron's playing really well. I think just having that star next to him that you know for a fact you could trust, like Luka Doncic, I think that can only just elevate a guy like LeBron at his given age, because he knows for a fact that he doesn't have to do all the work at the age that he has right now. And when you have a young budding star like Luka Doncic to basically be alongside with you, you're going to be in very good hands. Yeah. And I agree with you. I think that they're the hottest team. I thought when you're talking in terms of the hottest team right now in the West, at first I was really going to say the Cleveland Cavaliers, but then you said the West, and I'm like, all right, that makes a lot of sense, because the Cavs, I mean, you kind of could look at it from both sides. And I think, like you said, the OKC Thunder, right? They're the number one team for a reason. So that basically should tell people that they should be the best team in the conference. But I agree with you. I think that when you look at it, there's still a lot of other teams that you can make a case for because just the West is just that stacked that you can make a case that are better than the OKC player. That's obviously not a knock on OKC. That's just overall saying the fact. I mean, the Lakers have a ton of experience. They got two guys. You got one guy that's arguably one of the best players in our generation. And then you obviously have a guy that was just in the finals last year, and Luka Doncic, right? So, I mean, you can kind of look around. I mean, the Celtics are the 2 seed, right? But if you ask specifically people around the league, are they like, when you look at the Cavs, do you think that the Cavs specifically could beat the Celtics? Sure. But I think that there's going to be mostly a lot of the media that will pretty much tell you, given kind of they won the championship last year and they have the veteran experience that's already been in this situation for a couple of years now. I think a lot of people league-wide probably think the Celtics are probably the best team in the Eastern Conference. This is obviously not being biased, maybe a little bit. But I think just overall is just the experience is a massive thing in sports and obviously in the NBA. And just being the number 1 seed doesn't guarantee specifically that you're the overall best team.
Yeah, of course. I mean, the Hawks 10 years ago, I like to bring that up a lot. They made the Eastern Conference Finals. That's because they had they beat the Nets in 6 games, and the Nets really weren't good. And they beat the Wizards because John Wall got hurt. If John Wall doesn't get injured that year, the Wizards end up going to the Eastern Conference Finals. They were just a team built for the regular season. And I'm worried that maybe that might be the case with the Knicks. They beat Miami Heat they beat the Heat in OT in overtime, which was a great win. But I'm worried about the Knicks, and I'm largely worried about them because of their defense. Now, I am happy that Mitchell Robinson is back, and that makes a huge deal for their defense.
How's he been
in terms of their front court?
Really quick, how's Mitchell Robinson been playing, by the way? Because I really haven't gotten the chance.
He's been okay, but it's like his second game back.
Well, it makes that, yeah.
He just got back.
Had some time. Okay. Yeah,
so
I don't know how many
we don't really know yet. But he could end up being impactful for the Knicks defense because the Knicks are ranked the Knicks are one of the best offenses, but also one of the worst defenses in the league. And that's going to be bad in the playoffs. And I think it will show it. I think that problem I think the playoffs will shine a bright light on that problem. And a lot of that has to do with the Knicks' different front court as opposed to backcourt. I mean, Karl Anthony Towns is a great offensive player. He's not great. He's not a great defensive player. No. Last year, the Knicks had Hartenstein and Mitchell Robinson when he was playing, at least, and their defense was much better. Yeah. Their offense was much worse. So I'm worried about maybe the Knicks are just built for the regular season. People always talk about their 0-7 record against the Cavs, Celtics, and Thunder. And you know what? I sort of dismissed it at first, but I see it a little bit, like why that might be a problem. Not only are they losing those games, they're losing by really big margins. Like in all those games, they're losing by big margins. And that I think is a bit worrisome to me. The only possible silver lining is Mitchell Robinson is back, and maybe that'll make enough of a difference for their defense, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, I did get the chance to watch the end of this game. I got myself back from the Celtics-Nuggets game, which I was at yesterday for my birthday. But, yeah, I thought that the Knicks, I mean, they came back from double digits against Miami. The Heat obviously haven't had a great year, kind of given their standards this year, but that was a big win for the Knicks. I mean, I know that you were talking about in terms of the 0-7 stuff, this and that, but the Knicks just kind of have to keep pace right now. I think that right now, as it stands, I think they're still the number 3 seed or 4 seed. They're kind of in that overall niche right now. But Mitchell Robinson is a factor. I mean, if he is healthy and he is playing really, really well, I think that, I think just his overall presence potentially can maybe get guys like OG and maybe a guy like Mikal Bridges to kind of help evaluate on their defensive end because I agree with you. Cat, I think, was a great piece for you guys, but I think just he's a very good offensive piece. Defensively, I think that you guys definitely lost on the defensive end. I think that's what I always we're telling people is the Hartenstein loss is going to be a big, big loss because just the overall the Knicks, I think in the past against the Celtics, at least, was it 2 years ago that you guys absolutely owned us, I know in the regular season, but guys like Hartenstein were big. Of course, having that guy in the, that can get rebounds and just play defense. I mean, I saw Hargenside play last night with OKC, and guys a wall back there.
Yeah.
So I mean, it just kind of says something. But you guys definitely will be a top 4 team in the East. It's just going to come down to specifically the matchup in the playoffs. I could definitely see this team probably going through at least one round, and then from there it'll be kind of just we'll have to see, right? But I think it was just a big win for the overall team last night. But yeah, I do agree that against the Cavs and the Celtics and the Thunder, I think that the offense could probably take you so far, but then when it comes to the playoffs, the defense is really going to have to show up, or it'll probably be an exposed type of team.
Yeah. I do briefly want to talk about Pete Rose. Apparently, Trump is going to pardon Pete Rose.
Yeah.
Now, and apparently, and he might end up there's rumblings that he's going to get into the Hall of Fame now that he's dead.
Yeah.
And I said this for years, this was going to happen. I said for years that this was going to happen. Now, you have a problem with this. I do. I have a big problem with not letting him into the Hall of Fame until he's dead. I think that's really, really stupid. He's either a Hall of Famer or he's not. He's either Hall of Fame worthy or he's not. Specifically waiting until he dies almost seems sort of petty, but I don't understand why as a society we have to change people's legacies after they die. He's either Hall of Fame worthy or he's not. Just that general prompt is he's either Hall of Fame worthy. He's either worthy of being in the Hall of Fame or he's not. And that's it. It doesn't matter. Now that he's dead, he's not all of a sudden Hall of Fame worthy. My thought process is he absolutely should be in the Hall of Fame, Pete Rose. And that seems to be the majority opinion. I don't take an issue with him being banned from coaching or working with the MLB or anything like that. I'm fine with that. But he should be in the Hall of Fame because he's good enough to be in the Hall of Fame. Clearly, he's one of the greatest players ever. And to me, the Hall of Fame is a joke that they don't let in Pete Rose or Barry Bonds or Roger Clemens or A-Rod. I understand if it was on the fence and Pete Rose was on the fence and, Hall of Fame, not Hall of Fame. And because of the gambling, he doesn't get in. But he's clearly a Hall of Famer. And to me, it's just they're waiting until he dies. And it's just why even induct him when he's not even here to enjoy it?
Yeah.
To me, that's stupid. If he's a Hall of Famer, okay, fine. Maybe put him in the Hall of Fame when he's still alive. Do that. That would make way more sense than waiting until he dies. It would mean so much more to him and his family to at least be able to celebrate it. And I just think it's one thing to put somebody in after they die because they happen to die. That just unfortunately could happen. But in this case, it's they waited for him to die.
Yeah, no, I think another thing too, personally, I think that it's a very unclassy thing to potentially even have considering, because when you make the Hall of Fame, it's not only an achievement, but it's a celebration, right?
Yeah.
It's most of the time than not, guys like, Big Papi was obviously an idol that, of course, I grew up as, and still am. But just obviously the pictures that you kind of see with a guy like that in Cooperstown, and just the people, not only just the overall player, Nick, but it's just you got the families, you got the other players. It's just a big overall thing. And yeah, I mean, Pete Rose was one of the greatest ever. There was a ton of other people that took steroids that, yeah, you could make an argument didn't get in, but it didn't mean that they weren't great players. There were a lot of specifically great players that probably should have gotten in and probably should have gotten recognized. And I think that this was one of the guys that should have had happen. Unfortunately, it didn't happen. And now specifically the fact that you're going to wait when he's not unfortunately with us anymore is kind of a joke.
Yeah. Yeah. So on that note, we'll that's our show today. So I'll be back next week. This is moving the goalpost. You can follow us across social media at MTGP ETB, the Empty the Bench Network at ETB Network. You can follow me on Twitter at Nick DiMart, Ben at Ben Kruse 144. So I'll be back next week. See you.